And welcome everybody to the Dragon's Lair on Renegade Broadcasting, the best source for factual information on the planet. And that song was Achilles' Last Stand by Led Zeppelin off of the Presence album. That was their last studio album. Speaking of Led Zeppelin, I'm a big Led Zeppelin fan, and I saw them live. And that's actually pretty rare for someone my age because when I saw them, that was in 1977, and I was 16 when I saw them. They never had a major tour again. And you might hear my cat meow occasionally here tonight. She's sort of in a frisky mood. She's somewhat back to normal, just not quite got her weight back yet. And so anyway, that particular show that I saw in May of 1977 is available on the internet as a bootleg. You can do a search for The Dragon Snake, recorded in Houston, Texas in the Summit, 1977. Anyway, tonight's show is called Paint It Black, Continued and Final. And this again will be about Martin Luther King Jr., plagiarist, traitor, communist, criminal, philanderer, womanizer, and overall sleaze. A beast as a saint. I will again be destroying a sacred cow of the truth movement, of the patriotard movement. And then, by the way, doesn't Ron Paul quote Martin Luther King sometimes? Interesting. Anyway, tonight's show will be the conclusion. I could do more. However, there's other things that need to be discussed. We can't dwell on this forever. This is important, obviously, but this needs to get out. Now, I would also like to recommend that everybody go over to vdare.com after the show is over with, and I will post a link into the chat room now, and you'll be able to read the speech of Senator Jesse Helm on why we should not have a Martin Luther King holiday. This, I believe, was in front of Congress, and he passed away, I think, in 2008. So anyway, I want to mention this. If for some reason I do not finish, I will just keep on broadcasting until I am done, and you will have to catch the rest of it in the archives. You need to be downloading these shows anyway, so get on over there if I don't finish. Now, I have changed out my mouse on this computer. Hopefully that will solve the issue. So anyway, let's see here. Kitty cat, you're going to have to move. Come on. All right. Okay, before we get started here, be sure and give a listen to all the other hosts here on Renegade. I believe until further notice, we have Kyle on Mondays, to be determined, and or Wildcard Tuesdays with the guest host, or possibly a regular host filling in. Will on Wednesdays, Mike on Thursdays, Lou on Fridays, Roundtable on Saturdays, and of course me on Sunday. For the record, today is March 17th, 2013 on our screwed up Christian calendar. And today is St. Patrick's Day. However, this is not a holiday. This is a celebration of in Ireland of St. Patrick and supposedly removing all of the snakes in Ireland. Well, we all know what a snake represents now, don't we? And so this is not a good day to go out and party. Today the sun is at 26 degrees Pisces. Mercury went direct a few hours ago. However, we can still expect maybe some minor delays or issues with communication or general confusion for at least a couple of more days until it gets back to moving full speed. And in reality, until it gets back to the point where it went retrograde. And as I've mentioned before, I'm still having a transiting solar arc Mars conjuncting my natal ascendant, which is my first house, which represents a new beginning. That will be going on for a few weeks to come. I'm also experiencing a transiting Saturn conjuncting my descendant, which is the 7th house cusp and opposite the ascendant. So that's sort of another issue I may discuss on an astrology show one day. Speaking of which, again, I want everybody to watch the quantum astrology video. I will post this link into the chat, And if you have not seen it, get on over there and watch it. Now, let me get back to my screen here. I will not be monitoring the chat. I may glance at it during music breaks. And again, I'll be drinking my water and smoking where I'm sitting. So it may cause some pauses at times, as well as occasional silence for a cough or some hacking. We have a chat room. You can go to renegadebroadcasting.com. There should be a live feed for the last half hour. There's not one right at the moment. You can also go to renegadebroadcasting.chatango.com. And if you have not done so, I want to know the reason why. You need to join AlternativeSocial.com, social network created by Kyle of Renegade Broadcasting. There's a chat room there. You can go over there and read some really great posts. You can listen to the show at the same time. You can read some articles, whatever the case may be. Talk to some good people. And I want to bring to everybody's attention again, nationalprotectionism.com. Become involved. Okay? I have no personal website or blog. Probably wouldn't have a life if I did. No phone calls for tonight. Way too much material to cover. If you want to contact me, you can write me at magus_18@geocities.com. That's MAGUS_18 at GEOCITIES.com. If you want to subscribe to my e-list, just send me an email, says subscribe, or just write me. Can't guarantee I'll get to all the emails. And like I said before, the cat is with me tonight. She still needs to get some weight on her, but she's feeling a lot better. Okay, some things to discuss before I get into the issue tonight. Actually, it's just one more thing. After this Mercury retrograde is over, I'm going to get that item of information to that person in the chat. I promise. I promise I'll get it sooner or later. Okay, tonight's show again is Martin Luther Scumbag, and I'm going to reiterate this one last time. I didn't mention it on the last show. I did on the first. Most of his FBI file is sealed into the year 2027. There are a total of 16,659 pages. Only 201 of those pages are available to the public for viewing, and they are mostly on his assassination. What does that tell you? Okay, I'm going to play one more song here, and then I'm going to move on into reading this essay. A lot of information to cover tonight. Okay, I'm back. One more thing I'd like to mention before I start reading this. That show that was recorded live of Led Zeppelin called the Dragon Snake. That was a soundboard recording of the concert. It's about 3 hours long, and it was recorded on the soundboard, so there is very little audience noise, and so you're getting direct microphone feeds and feeds for their amps and the drums, etc. It's a very good quality recording, especially for 1977. All right, now I'll backtrack just a hair so we can pick up where we left off, and I'll read a couple of paragraphs that I ended with last time. King constantly complained that both he and his cohorts were exploited and oppressed. Was he trying to get something across, perhaps a threat to American culture, when he suggested that men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression? It is amusing how he stated, quote, we in the West, end quote. Earlier in his diatribe, King stated that America, quote, fell victim to the deadly Western arrogance that has poisoned the international atmosphere for so long, end quote. Ironically, several paragraphs later in his speech, he felt that he was part of the same, quote, deadly Western arrogance, unquote. If there was ever any doubt about King's true allegiances, it is revealed by one of his own sentences, quote, we in the West must support these revolutions, end quote. King never cared for the American soldiers dying in Vietnam. He only cared for the Viet Cong's revolution. In King's speech, he said that America should not fear communism, but why should not Americans have morbid fear of communism? But why should not Americans have a morbid fear of communism? Communism was responsible for countless millions of deaths under the dictatorships of Stalin, Mao, and other disgusting characters. As for him accusing Americans of being the so-called arch anti-revolutionaries, Americans were hardly that. The purpose of the intervention was to help the Vietnamese residing in the southern part so that they would not have to bear the evils associated with the dictatorship of communism. King's speech inflamed all the patriotic organizations across the U.S. Malcolm Tarlov, who was the national commander of the Jewish war veterans, chided King for giving that speech. Tarlov said that King's speech was an ignorance of the facts, pandering to Ho Chi Minh, and an insult to the intelligence of all Americans. Tarlov probably felt that way because all of the baseless lies that King said, which seemingly came straight from the Viet Cong's party line. King even went to the extent of suggesting that America's part in the Vietnam War was similar to the Nazis testing new medicines and new tortures in the concentration camps of Europe. Now, keep in mind, that was from a Jew. Tarlov felt that King's speech was irresponsible. It is indeed said that so respected a national leader should have voiced his dissent so irresponsibly. Now, why he would refer to him as a national leader, I don't know. His speech could have been written in North Vietnam, and it may have been. King's speech was filled with all types of other asinine lies. We poisoned their water. We killed 1 million acres of their crops. We may have killed 1 million of them, mostly children. They see the soldiers selling their sisters, soliciting their mothers. Throwing in a comment to relate it to his civil rights war, King said one more flagrant lie. Twice as many Negroes as whites are in combat. Total bullshit. Senator Thomas Dodd, Democrat of Connecticut, noted that Martin Luther King Jr. was aiding the enemies of the United States. Senator Dodd correctly noted that King was calling for the admission of Red China to the United Nations and demanding that the United States commit itself to negotiate with the Viet Cong. And King felt that, implied Senator Dodd, the United States should reorient its policy along the lines of accommodation with communism. Maybe I can get my speech straightened out here. Continuing, Senator Dodd proclaimed, quote, Dr. King has since announced he will write letters within the next 10 days to the President of North Vietnam and the leaders of the government of Communist China and the Soviet Union. If Dr. King carries on a correspondence with foreign governments, it could run counter to the provisions of the Logan Act, a federal statute which says any citizen of the United States, wherever he may be, who, without authority of the United States, directly or indirectly commences or carries on any correspondence or intercourse with any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof, with intent to influence the measures or conduct of any foreign government or of any officer or agent thereof in relation to any disputes or controversies with the United States, or to defeat the measures of the United States, shall be fined not more than $5,000 or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both, end quote. Who did King think he was? He had no right, no authority to make negotiations, pacts, agreements, or even discuss the war with the communist leadership whom America was battling. It seems quite evident that King was assisting the Viet Cong by his speeches in the U.S. and consequently hurting U.S. soldiers stationed in Vietnam. During the heated debates that took place over America's policy with Vietnam, Joseph O'Mara, the dean of Notre Dame University Law School and activist in the American Civil Liberties Union, felt that irreparable harm was being done to the civil rights movement. For the most part, O'Mara said, I am persuaded the objectors are either communists or traitors or cowards. Continuing, O'Mara could not help but notice that King and one of his associates, Carmichael, weep only for the enemy. King's alliances should have been clear to everyone, yet people still fell for his double talk, since he was an articulate spokesman. An excellent example of King's gift for double talk was his response to some clergymen who called him an extremist. Rather than disagree with the clergyman, King admitted to being an extremist, but said it in such a way that he likened himself to Jesus Christ and said that the world was in dire need of his creative extremism. Quote, the question is not whether we are extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. In the dramatic scene on Calvary's Hill, 3 men were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. 2 were extremists for immorality and thus fell below their environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. So after all, maybe the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists, in quotes. Asshole. King had no problem voicing his feelings for the Viet Cong, but for some odd reason he never seemed to speak badly of their actions, even when they tortured the South Vietnamese. Where were King's complaints about the 2,429 Vietnamese citizens who were killed between July of 1965 and December 1966 by the Viet Cong? Where was King's condemnation when the U.S. troops discovered an atrocity at a mountain village 15 miles east of Pleiku on August 24, 1965? The Viet Cong had just executed the aged village chief and his youngest son. The village chief's wife was still alive, but the Viet Cong had tortured her by carving flesh from her body and cutting her arms. Why did King, who claimed to be a man of peace, not complain when Viet Cong guerrillas kidnapped an entire village of men, women, and children in an unprecedented act of terrorism? Why did King only condemn America, the very nation that was attempting to liberate South Vietnamese from the communist dictatorship of the Viet Cong? To accurately answer the aforementioned question, you have to understand the word peace and how communists use it. Like the deceptive names that communists have used for their organizations, they also try to disguise their true intentions by throwing in honorable words like peace, justice, liberty, etc. in their sentences. Words that make their reasoning seem wholesome to those not aware of their ulterior motives. The communists have been doing that for quite some time and are proficient at it. Cough a second. On April 1st, 1951, the House Committee on Un-American Activities released a report called The Communist Peace Offensive, a campaign to disarm and defeat the United States. This report said, the most dangerous hoax ever devised by the international communist conspiracy is the current worldwide peace offensive. In the report, the House Committee noted that the communists have boldly seized upon the word peace in an effort to secure moral sanction for its own aggressive designs. To achieve this, communists must at the same time portray their victims and intended victims as being ruled by imperialists, warmongers, and war criminals. In short, the communists decided that the best way to disarm their enemies, the people of America, who found the communist ideology to be insipid, was to propagandize the peace line so stridently that Americans would embrace it. The communist goal was simple: disarm the enemy from within. After all, a head-on attack would have been disastrous for any communist nation or any group working within America. The Communist Party USA, in their so-called Spring Mobilization for Peace, on April 15, 1967, said, quote, "We are now approaching a moment in which the fight for peace can develop into the greatest grassroots movement this country has seen in more than a quarter century," close quote. Evidently, they did not realize that fight and peace are opposites. Unfortunately, their movement did, indeed, become the greatest grassroots movement this country has seen, and now has numerous organizations that it created, sowing the seeds of decadence. King was familiar with the double talk that the Communist Party espoused at their party line and used it to his benefit wherever he went. For instance, when King attended the 100th anniversary for the black communist W.E.B. Du Bois, King was quoted as having said the following, quote, "Our irrational obsession with anti-communism has led us into many quagmires. Dr. Du Bois will be with us when we go to Washington to demand our right for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," end quote. King and his comrades were not being deprived of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, nor did King or any of his comrades, like the communist Jack Odell, who also attended the event, have an irrational obsession with anti-communism. It seems that the only irrational obsession was their belief in communism. going to celebrate the life of a man who was a self-admitted communist and who hated the U.S. during his life. King's activities upset quite a few people in the government, at least the ones who were not fooled by King's articulate double talk. King's double talk led to J. Edgar Hoover calling King the most notorious liar in the country. Hoover never changed his mind about King. King and Hoover became at odds with one another because of King's anti-American activities. Also, former President Harry Truman did not like King's tactics. Truman said King was a troublemaker. Congressman John Ashbrook of Ohio was perturbed over King's subversive activities. Congressman Ashbrook noted that King was disloyal to the United States. Continuing his statement, Congressman Ashbrook said, King maligned his country with lies and accusations that come straight from the Communist Party line. He praised Ho Chi Minh as the only true leader of the Vietnamese people. He condemned the United States as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today and likened our nation to Hitler's Germany. He condemned the late President Diem as one of the most vicious modern dictators and threw out wild charges like the United States may have killed 1 million children in Vietnam. Now, obviously, this man is speaking publicly and is not going to praise Germany in any way, shape, or form. And by the way, I'm not going to discuss anything regarding the Vietnam War here. It's not my intent to discuss that. You only have to understand that the nature of this article is viewing the Vietnam War as being a war that was good and we were fighting communism. Never mind the actual validity behind it. I liken it similar to Iraq, perhaps, in a way. Not wholeheartedly, but close. Let me take a momentary pause for a drink of water. Okay. King's involvement in foreign affairs extended beyond just the ideology of communism, beyond talking on behalf of communists in Vietnam, beyond meeting and conspiring with communists the world over. King was so involved with foreign affairs that he accepted money from some pretty shady characters. Some of these shady characters were from other countries which were not too friendly with America's democratic form of government. In other words, King was working against the government of the United States of America and was paid for it. The Washington Observer newsletter disclosed King's ties to communism, noting that an FBI report existed on him. The evidence that was contained in the report, which our government has kept from the general public, had some shocking revelations, according to the Washington Observer. The Washington Observer said, quote, when the FBI agents had King under surveillance, they observed him meet a well-identified Soviet espionage agent at the Kennedy Airport in New York. They also secured evidence that King was receiving large sums of money from a well-known American communist agent who gives King instructions that he implicitly obeys, end quote. Stanley Levinson was one of King's colleagues. Levinson was often described as King's money man. He was King's closest white associate, if you want to use that phrase, white. J. Edgar Hoover said that Levinson was a Soviet spy and member of the Communist Party USA. The late President John F. Kennedy informed King that Levinson was dangerous in a meeting, hoping that King would stop meeting with Levinson and other communists before something happened. During a raid of the SCEF, a check was found. This check, by the way, can be found on Google image searches if you do a search for Martin Luther King in the image section. The check, which had been endorsed by King, was from the communist James Dombrowski and was made out to King. On the check, dated March 7, 1963, there was a little note written that told why the money was given. New York expenses. Apparently, Dombrowski was paying King for expenses that King incurred during his battle with the American government. King often used the Vietnam War as a means of raising money. He had the protesters send him money. Congressman O.C. Fisher of Texas complained about King's money-making activities. Congressman Fisher noted that King had turned to noted that King had, quote, had turned to a crusade in favor of the communists in Vietnam as a means of raising money, end quote. Describing King's activities, Congressman Fisher stated, quote, Martin Luther King has turned to a crusade in favor of the communists in Vietnam as a means of raising money. He recently said that he was shooting for $700,000. In aiding the communists, he has bitterly denounced the U.S. King has been both brazen and open in his violation of the law, and he is joined by more than a score of other sick minds and corrupt souls. The American people want to know, and they have a right to know. When is the Department of Justice going to crack down on these disloyal elements in our society? These mercenary crackpots should be shown no mercy. They have gone far beyond the realm of normal dissent. They are actively aiding the communist aggressors in Vietnam while violating the laws of their own country. End quote. Congressman Fisher was right. We, the American people, did and still do have a right to know when this affront to our liberties will end. Only by standing up and being counted with a barrage of lies that have been foisted upon us end. And then, and only then, will we be able to rid ourselves of the lies that have separated this nation from its course. We have a right to see the FBI files on King that the courts closed. The time has come to demand that right. A stop must be put to the politically correct historical revisionists who have distorted history to unprecedented lengths in order to make their motives seem wholesome. This needs to be done, for what occurred after King's death is a national disgrace. In France, there is an age-old adage, and I'm not going to try to read French, okay? You're asking some guy from southeast Texas to read French. Sorry. It means, the king is dead, long live the king. The saying makes an appropriate title for this chapter for three reasons. Chapter of this essay. Number one, it was not until after Martin Luther King Jr.'s death that few dared to speak the truth about his nefarious activities. Number two, the adage is fitting because of a chant that black eulogizers exclaimed after King was convicted for leading the Montgomery bus boycott, "Behold the King, long live the King." Number three, after King's deaths, many tenets that he believed and promoted have become accepted, living long past his life. After King was killed by James Earl Ray, King's image changed. People tend not to speak badly of the dead, especially the same people who are worried about being victimized by all the riots that broke out afterwards. It seems that very few politicians would discuss King's activities after his death. The politicians probably did not want to upset the rioters who quickly destroyed the cities after King's death. Perhaps the politicians felt that if they discussed King's activities, it might have made the riots worse, if that were possible. Also, some politicians were probably fearful of losing the African American bloc vote in these cities. However, there were a few bold politicians. Congressman Tuck said, quote, "Although it is conceded that King openly advocated nonviolence, he fomented discord and strife between the races. Violence followed in his wake wherever he went, north or south, until he himself fell a victim to violence. He who sows the seed of sin shall reap and harvest a whirlwind of evil. I believe that the Bible, that he who takes up the sword shall also perish by the sword." The victim of murder preached compliance only with the laws he approved of, and thus was in contempt of statutes not to his liking. Hence, he and his followers, in a most brazen and flagrant manner, flouted the time-honored concept of his nation, which is one of laws and not of men. In one of his last public utterances, he openly stated that he intended to violate a solemn court injunction. At the same time, he was planning to invade Washington, D.C., with a horde of the host of evil to disrupt and stay the wheels of government of the United States. Every sensible person knows, as he himself must have known, that such an act would result in wholesale property destruction, bloodshed, and death to this beleaguered city. This man trampled upon the laws of our country with impunity, and the Stokely Carmichaels and the Rat Browns respond in the waters of hate agitated by his public utterances. Close quote. The American flag flew at half-mast to a man who aided and abetted the communists of North Vietnam. As he publicly supported the draft card burners, and sought to undermine and betray our fighting sons in Vietnam, said Senator-elect Claude B. Duval of Yuma, Louisiana. Continuing, Duval noted how ironic the whole ordeal was concerning King's death. Quote, in the avalanche of propaganda, hypocrisy, and falsehood that followed the death of King, the president and national figures together with the news media have undertaken to eulogize and commit to martyrdom Martin Luther King Jr., who under the guise of nonviolence caused violence wherever he went. The voice of truth is not heard in the land. All has been forgiven. All has been forgotten. None seem to remember that only the day before his death, King openly declared his intention to violate law and order, a federal court order. This was nothing new since he had previously violated a court order. We witness in our major cities looting, theft, burglary, arson, robbery, murder, all indeed a fitting tribute to an advocate of violence. I call upon all men, the responsible Negro community as well as the white, to face the facts and truth and to dispel from all minds the falsehood and hypocrisy that has been visited upon us by our leaders in the news media. If the men who died in World War II, in Korea, and Vietnam should return, they would cry out in horror at the eulogizing of a man who aided and abetted the enemies of this nation, who preached disobedience of law, and who incited violence and riot. I know I speak against the tide of overwhelming emotion, but let the voice of truth be heard in the land. If it is possible, let the voice of reason be heard. Then may the Negro and the white communities join together in a truthful and realistic effort to build a better society. End quote. The riots began as they had before, as they did in 92, and as they will again. I'm not sure what they mean by 92. It's apostrophe 92. 1892? Maybe this is referring to the LA riots. Okay. The riots began as they did before in 92, and as they will again. And with the riots came the accompanying horror stories of rioters having their fun, laughing while they destroyed the cities. A total of 110 riots were reported in cities across the nation after King's death, caused by a single fanatical white. 75,000 National Guardsmen and federal troops were dispatched to stop the lawlessness of the rioters. 39 innocent people were killed in the aftermath. David Dominic, an attorney who was a legislative assistant to Senator Clifford Hansen, watched the horrid events unfold in Washington, D.C. and described what occurred. Quote, reaction to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. last Tuesday night created the worst crisis since the Civil War in the history of Washington, D.C. This morning, an uneasy truce settled over the nation's capital, but new violence could break out. This past weekend of infamy will be debated, discussed, and cursed by many for months to come. On Thursday night, 4 white youths stopped for a gasoline at a service station in downtown Washington. They did not know that Dr. King had just been murdered in Memphis, but they were attacked by a gang of Negro youths. One of the whites was badly beaten and fatally stabbed. His companions fled with him in their car out of Washington, across the Potomac, and to a hospital in Virginia. The boy died, but the incident was little noted in the press. Par for the course, I'd say, and see how long this has been going on. On Thursday, grief at the death of Dr. King gripped all of official Washington. On Friday, senators, stockbrokers, workers all flowed, as usual, into Washington from the suburbs. But by Friday afternoon, an awful fact confronted the people here. The city was on fire. First black smoke, then ugly red smoke could be seen from the upper floors of every government building in Washington, from the White House to the Capitol building. Firebombs burst in major stores of the downtown district, and the looters were off and running. Nervous office workers thought, naturally, first of their homes, and second, how they might get there. The U.S. Army troops were slow in being deployed, and the looters and firebombers went virtually unchecked. The press reported that in the city's beautiful parks, young men jaunted up and down in front of admiring girls trying on this or that. Stolen minutes before from fashionable men's stores nearby. One reporter friend of ours witnessed a white Cadillac pull off in front of a downtown jewelry store. They left out the word A. Two men smashed the windows, stripped the storefront of its tray of jewels, got into their car, drove slowly down into traffic, stopped at a red light next to a patrol car, waved to the officers, and drove off as a cop on foot raced desperately to tell his fellow officers in their car of the crime. The efficiency of the firebombers was chilling. First the windows were smashed, then the looters did their quick work, and last came the firebombs. Earlier that day, the New York Times reported that newspapers in both London and Paris had immediately compared the assassination of King with that of John F. Kennedy. Before this, many Americans had obviously viewed Dr. King as a Negro leader, no matter how begrudgingly. Now, overnight, Europeans coached us into the realization that King was viewed in the world as one of our country's greatest Americans. What crap. There were some people who did not riot, but rather mourn King's death. It is interesting to take a look at some of the mourners who shared their sympathy with King when King was assassinated. The front page of the Communist Party USA's publication Worker for April 14, 1968, had a story that noted some of King's former comrades. Quote, Henry Winston, national chairman of the Communist Party USA, led a six-man party delegation to the funeral of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Tuesday in Atlanta. The other representatives were Claude Lightfoot, Mickey Lima of San Francisco, Charlene Mitchell of Los Angeles, Arnold Johnson, and Gil Green. The Soviet Union's youth, students, and peace organizations and trade unions sent messages of sympathy too. Memorial meetings took place all over the Soviet Union. Factories, halls, and theaters, even Moscow University artists and intellectuals paid tribute to King at the Friendship House, which was held by the Soviet American Friendship Society and the Soviet Peace Committee. James Jackson, the leader of the American Communist Party, was, of course, one of the speakers at the Friendship House. Now, it's a little bit before the top of the hour. I'm going to go ahead and stop here and give my voice a rest, play a song, and we'll pick up in just a second here. Okay, I'm back. You may want to check over at renegadebroadcasting.com, see if we have a stream now. The sound quality should be better if there is one up there. If not, just continue listening on Blog Talk. Okay, we'll pick up where we left off here. The Soviet Peace Committee even went to the extent of sending the Southern Christian Leadership Conference a letter on behalf of some of the communists. They expressed their indignation over King's death. The hearts of the Soviet people are filled with pain and anger at the monstrous crime of American racists. Throughout the communist bastion came condolences. Waldeck Rochette, General Secretary of the French Communist Party, made certain that his regrets were known. Poland's Peace Committee sent condolences to Coretta King, according to the April 9, 1968 edition of The Worker. Also, The Worker noted that William Patterson, Secretary of the Negro Department of the Communist Party USA, sent a telegram to Coretta King, wishing her the best. Tonight we'll join with all progressive mankind in expressing the deep pain and anguish at the monstrous assassination of your illustrious husband. It is not too surprising that there was an article in the same issue entitled Dr. King's Legacy, called Fulfill It, Communist Demand. In that article, there is reference to a march that King planned on attending before his death, called The Poor People's March upon Washington Must Not Falter. It must take place in greater numbers than even previously planned. Not too long after King's death, the Poor People's March took place in Washington, D.C. The march supposedly had one purpose: to obtain more government benefits at the expense of taxpayers. U.S. Representative Samuel Devine from Ohio, quoting an Ohio newspaper that described members of the Poor People's March who made a pit stop in Ohio, noted, quote, what has been reported as, and what may have started as, a massed effort to obtain more federal aid looks in reality like a Black Power movement, if those passing through Columbus, Ohio, are at all typical. First inkling of attitudes of the guests came when Black Power chants drifted through open bus windows behind police escorts. Many wore African-type garb or sweatshirts emblazoned with "Soul Brother," "Soul Sister," Milwaukee NAACP Youth Council, and "Black Power." The Poor People's March, by the way, end quote, the Poor People's March must have been a sight to behold. There were many bitter protesters. Reverend Ralph D. Abernathy was wearing one of the marchers' armbands that read, "Mississippi, goddamn." Such a devout Christian he must have been. One white person made the mistake of protesting the peace-loving protesters and experienced the love that the demonstrators had. The white person had a sign that read, "I am fighting poverty. I work. Have you tried it?" His mistake. He was stabbed and hospitalized by those peace-loving demonstrators. Hosea Williams, the march coordinator, shared the feelings that the marchers held. By the time we're through in D.C., white folks are going to say, "Where's Dr. King? Wake up, Dr. King." Those white folks killed the dreamer, but we're going to show these white folks what became of the dream. The poor people are marching to challenge the Pharaoh. Reverend Abernathy, who became head of the SCLC after King's assassination, had an article published in the April 16, 1968 edition of The Worker. In the article, he was quoted as saying the typical communist harangue in his speech that the nation's problems was not black meanness, but white sickness. The sickness is a contagious disease, a disease created by a capitalistic society and brought here by none other than the white man. Congressman Buchanan, speaking before the House, subsequently promulgated who benefited from King's assassination. The hand that gunned down Martin Luther King Jr. served the world communist cause well, and no other cause I know. Certainly the people who hold those beliefs did benefit from King's death by the acceptance of their views by more people in society. With all of this being fully known by some of the people in our government, it is amazing that they would actually support and advocate Michael King's birthday bash. In Arizona, it eventually passed after a mass propaganda campaign was released upon the unsuspecting populace. The first time that the people had an opportunity to vote on the King holiday, the good people refused it for at least a couple of reasons. Some knew of King's sordid past. Others did not feel it necessary to have another government-paid holiday, which was paid with the people's taxes, of course, and is to this day. Because the good people of Arizona originally decided against the Michael King holiday, other groups awarded blacks with an offer of $200,000 in minority scholarships to the University of Louisville and Alabama, according to Newsweek. The large S was designed to make amends for Arizona voters' refusal last month to approve a Martin Luther King holiday. Ironically, it took an African-American, Michael Williams, to complain about the ordeal. Evidently, most whites were too cowardly to protest or were too uninformed to protest, and no one paid much attention to the few who did, probably assuming that those complaining were merely ignorant when nothing would have been further from the truth. The people of Arizona quickly learned that they would be punished for their decision not to have a King holiday. The 1993 Super Bowl would be taken out of Arizona because of the people's failure to enact the King holiday. Numerous other groups were considering boycotting the state of Arizona, including the National League of Cities, the Episcopalian National Convention, and National Urban League. Bob Rose, who led opponents of the bill for a King Day, said, quote, "The only thing legally they can do is have a referendum in 1992. And it'll get defeated 2-1, straight up and down," end quote. Unfortunately, he was wrong. The good people of Arizona, unknowing of the full scope of King's activities, decided to have the King holiday. Football was on. Sister Souljah, however the hell you pronounce that, the militant rapper or hip-hopper, whatever that type of musician is called, who once suggested that blacks would take a week to kill whites, or should take a week to kill whites, was asked about how she felt about Dr. King in a brief interview with the magazine Life. She said that she feels the image of King is not correct. People who are in power in white America have twisted the image of Dr. King to take out the sting of who he was. Many others seem to echo her opinion. Although she may be wrong about a lot of things, she appears to be right about that. Evan Mecham, the former governor of the state of Arizona, and a white man who has not twisted the image of Dr. King to take the sting out of whom he was asked what he thought about Martin Luther King Jr. in the magazine Life. He said that the government should not demote George Washington and Abraham Lincoln's birthdays, namely President's Day, while elevating King's holiday. He felt that if King had lived, he probably would have gone downhill substantially, said Mecham. Without his assassination, I doubt he would have ever had the credibility. Very few people speak badly of the dead. New Hampshire, just like Arizona, was one of the few states that did not have a day for King. That is, until the avalanche of propaganda. In 1993, New Hampshire finally agreed to have a Martin Luther King Jr. celebration, joining Arizona and the 48 other American states in the celebration. About the same time, Jesse Jackson received the prestigious King Peace Prize for his work. One black columnist, Barbara Reynolds of USA Today, suggested that Americans need Kingology, what she calls King's nonviolent moral code of love of others, love of self, black pride, and human concern today. Black pride, from where did that come? You have to wonder how she would feel if white columnists started to say what whites need, white pride. Two black activists, Lenora Fulani, who is running for governor of New York on the New Alliance Party ticket, and Al Sharpton, pitched tents on Liberty Island, forcing the Statue of Liberty to be closed. They did that to commemorate Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. In a rally at Battery Park City, Fulani shared her own dreams. We want to rename New York City Martin Luther King City. Besides having streets, holidays, and numerous other things named after him, Martin Luther King Jr. now has a game named after him, King O. Shirley Barnes, who was an African American in the late 1970s, invented the game. It is similar to bingo, except there are words used instead of numbers. The words, as can be expected, are all noble: family, home, humble, respect, Nobel, peace, and prize. Ms. Barnes said the first word on the list is love, because that's what Dr. King was all about. The game even comes with ideas for teachers, so that they may use the game for history lessons or for resolving conflicts peacefully. You have to wonder how students can resolve conflicts peacefully by using King's tactics. So, not only do we have, I'm interjecting here, not only do we have, the hula hoax forced down our throats, we also constantly have this barrage of Martin Luther King Jr. shoved down our throats as well. And our children's, of course. Back to this essay. Numerous organizations have held rallies in which King's name is revered and used as a call to peace. This seems strange when all of the known instances of King flagrantly disobeying the law. However, many of the rallies end in violence or promote more preferential treatments for blacks. So in that respect, there's a bit of similarity between King's ideology and that of his followers. About 30 years after King led the so-called civil rights marches in Washington, D.C., his disciples had another march on Washington. The march, which was held by gay rights activists, socialists, and vagabonds, among others, had Coretta Scott King speak before them. She exclaimed to the unique crowd, quote, "Dr. King's spirit is with us. Yes, it is," end quote. The crowd, which was estimated at 0.03% of America's population, responded to King's widow, quote, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last," end quote. Other people of notoriety either spoke or attended the rally. Ben Chavez, who was the president of the NAACP at the time, spoke there and shared his demands with the unique crowd. "We want more than fair treatment. We want a fair share of the economy," said Chavez, reiterating the demands that the civil rights advocates have held for so long. Rosa Parks, Jesse Jackson, and Attorney General Janet Reno also attended the event. In an effort to combat white heterosexuals, Chavez NAACP enlisted the help of all homosexuals. Quote, Our board has approved a stand on gay rights several months ago, end quote, said Chavez. Quote, it was a unanimous decision, end quote. Chavez is not new to controversy, though. After being implicated in the firebombing of Mike's grocery store, Chavez, 8 other blacks, and a white woman were sent to prison in 1972. Several blacks testified in court that Chavez had used the church as a civil rights headquarters to plan the attack. In 1979, North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt, at the behest of his black voters, granted Chavez clemency. And after Chavez was free, he went to work for the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, which is one of the U.S. Communist Party's fronts, as the co-chairman. Charlene Mitchell, a black woman who was the Communist Party presidential candidate for 1968, served as the co-chairwoman of the group at the time. Since then, Chavez has befriended many people in his visits to communist nations. Chavez's wife, Martha Rivera, was a translator for Angola's communist government when Chavez met her. After Benjamin Chavez became head of the NAACP, he swiftly chose Don Rojas as his communications director. Apparently, Rojas had qualifications that Chavez had hoped to find. Rojas had worked as Maurice Bishop's press secretary during the time that Bishop headed Grenada's communist government. At one of the NAACP conventions that Chavez attended, he raised his clenched fist in an apparent Black Panther Marxist salute with a good friend of his, Nelson Mandela. It seems that Chavez likes the idea of redistributing people's money. Chavez was eventually ousted from the NAACP for making a sexual misconduct settlement without the board of directors knowing about it. However, none of this should be too surprising when you consider the NAACP's history. You can probably be sure that whoever replaces Chavez will have similar qualifications. Chavez is hardly the only civil rights advocate to support the acceptance of sodomy. When Clinton was appointed president, one of the first things he did was to invite his homosexual friends to participate in festivities. To make his inaugural party the focal point of deviancy, President Clinton had the Gay and Lesbian Bands of America participate in the party. The video, called Gay Rights, Special Rights, Inside the Homosexual Agenda, which appears to have been made by some racial minorities who were concerned about losing their special privileges, or as some of them in the video say, full minority status, shows actual footage of the 1993 March on Washington, including the homosexuals' plans. A militant homosexual began his speech before the assemblage by paraphrasing King, a fitting tribute. Another homosexual who was at the 1993 March on Washington had a sign that declared, "Civil rights or civil war." Clinton expressed his thanks for the $3.5 million the homosexuals contributed to his campaign, by the way, via a videotape, which was shown on a large screen television at the homosexuals' festivities. President Clinton said, "I just want to thank the gay and lesbian community for their courage." One lesbian commented, "It's our new government now. It's our government now." Another one said, "Clinton is a friend of ours, and he's going to take care of all gay and lesbian rights, and he's going to shake up the country." During the homosexuals' festivities in Washington, D.C., some transvestites had strip shows. As the transvestites threw their clothes around in the air, the innocent children of homosexuals, many of whom were probably adopted, stood by crying, with tears running down their cheeks. Members of the North American Man-Boy Lover Association attended the event as well. The innocent children of the U.S. are suffering and being prevented the right to a peaceful existence because of this abomination, which is born in the so-called civil rights movement of King. The homosexuals had a list of demands, which they called human rights, that they made. They wanted these demands to be added as a constitutional amendment. Following is a summary of some of their demands. Number 1, all forms of sexual expression would be allowed. Number 2, all laws prohibiting sodomy would be abolished. Number 3, all laws that prohibited certain types of unusual clothing or lack of clothing should be gone. Number 4, all age of sexual consent laws should be repealed, thereby allowing homosexuals to have sex with whatever child they choose. Number 5, money from the government's War Department would be diverted to cover the costs and medical expenses for homosexuals with AIDS. Number 6, taxes would be used to pay for sex change operations, allowing more homosexuals to parade in their surgical disguise. Number 7, homosexuals in all areas of the U.S. would be allowed to adopt children or provide foster care for them, which, combined with the homosexual's fourth desire, would allow them to adopt and commit sodomy with any child available for adoption. Number 8, homosexual marriages would be permitted in any area that does not accept it. Number 9, homosexuals would be accepted in designing education for children, in making child care, and for providing school counseling in areas in which they are not currently allowed. Number 10, contraception devices and abortion would be provided to all people for free, no matter what the person's age, and in this case, a very young person, without the person's parents' approval. Number 11, artificial insemination would be allowed for any bisexual or lesbian woman who wanted to have children so that she could raise them in that type of lifestyle, which would also allow the lesbian to teach the child to hate men. Number 12, no religious concerns of homosexuality would be allowed, with religious institutions losing their tax-exempt status if they did not comply. And number 13, private groups like the Cub Scouts must accept homosexuals into their groups. Now, could you imagine a constitutional amendment like that? In Atlanta, Georgia, a rally was held for King on January 18, 1993. Jean Bertrand Aristide, Haiti's ousted president, Jesse Jackson, and Coretta Scott King attended the rally along with about 1,100 other people. Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter, the Reverend Bernice King, officiated the ceremony at Ebenezer Baptist Church. In the course of her discussion, she referred to her father as a prophet. She said, "It's time for those of us who have benefited from the message and the mission of Prophet King to come together and make his spirit come alive again in our our midst." At other places, similar activities occurred on that cold January day in 1993. In Denver, Colorado, some of Martin Luther King Jr.'s followers were engaged in a rally. The rally quickly turned into a party. Some of those in attendance smashed a liquor store's window to get the party supplies, obviously, while others beat a white woman until she was unconscious, their idea of the party. New Hampshire Governor Steve Merrill gave an order that changed the name of Civil Rights Day to King Day for his state. And not too surprisingly, marches occurred in various places like Phoenix, Arizona, to celebrate King's birthday. After the Rodney King verdict, hundreds of students in Atlanta, the hometown of Martin Luther King Jr., had a march. Mayor Maynard Jackson pleaded with the students, quote, "Let us not discredit the name of Martin Luther King, not in his hometown. Don't try to tear the city up." Although the two sentences were a contradiction, end quote. Although the two sentences were a contradiction, since Martin Luther King Jr. himself often provoked riots and tried to tear Atlanta up, certainly would not discredit his name. The underlying message to black students was understood. Please do not loot, burn, and destroy the city of Atlanta. The mayor's begging was an effort in futility. The Nubians, just another name for African Americans, smashed store windows, threw stones and bottles, and assaulted white pedestrians, but certainly did not discredit the name of Martin Luther King Jr. King's legacy lives. Martin Luther King Jr.'s descendants are still quite active. Martin Luther King III, or should it be Michael King III, was a bit upset when he ran for office in Georgia. He hoped to become chairman of the Fulton County Commission in 1993. The newspaper Atlanta Constitution predicted he would win by a 2-to-1 margin. Another candidate beat him by almost 15,000 votes, about 15% of all votes cast. His mom, Coretta Scott King, broke down in tears and cried, "How could the people vote down the king?" Indeed, why would people vote down the king when there is plenty of pro-king propaganda disseminating from every corner of American culture? Even though Martin Luther King III may not be as charismatic and articulate as his father, his name still carries some weight with those who accept falsehoods without question. King III was involved in a problem with the IRS, which may have had an effect on his voters' decisions. He reportedly did not pay the IRS some money in taxes. Honest citizens call it tax evasion. He settled the dispute by borrowing $150,000 from his mom when she probably gave to the IRS. Well, my thoughts on the IRS I'll leave out of this. Martin Luther King Jr. had become an international celebrated figure. Shortly after King's death, Congressman John R. Rarick from Louisiana, speaking before the House of Representatives, said that Martin Luther King Jr. was the United Nations proclaimed Messiah. Rarick could not understand why some of the politicians attended King's funeral. After all, said Rarick, King was a disloyal American who linked with over 60 organizations intent on the destruction of America. Congressman Rarick had a good reason for calling King the United Nations proclaimed Messiah. King once said, quote, I would strengthen a channel already in existence. I would work to bring about universal disarmament and set up a world police force through the United Nations. I would also consider some form of world government, end quote. King was not the only prominent spokesman to promote some type of bizarre world government. There have been others that believe that the United Nations should be used for things other than resolving disputes among different nations through peaceful means rather than violent conflicts, which is why the UN was supposedly created. Some of the members of the UN appear to be power hungry and want to be able to control the actions of different nations, thinking that they are some worldly Congress instead of the professional mediators that they are. It appears that some of the members of the UN believe they can control, encourage, and regulate what people do. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and play another song here. We're getting real close to the end of this. We got about a half hour left in the show for the blog talk portion of it, anyway. And so here is some Lacuna Coil, Heaven's a Lie. Okay, I'm back. Okay, we'll pick up where we left off here. Today, King had become an internationally celebrated figure among blacks. In South Africa, blacks there revere Martin Luther King Jr. The tradition of civil disobedience is now commonly associated with Thoreau, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr., though they are not its originators, said Mokgweetsi Mat-Habi, a black South African writer who is sympathetic to Mandela's African National Congress, or the ANC. Just as the U.S. had riots under King's leadership and still continues to have sporadic riots under the guidance of others, South Africa experiences similar violence. As far as the ANC is concerned, there is no doubt that it did spend some days preparing its following for nonviolent action, said Mothabi. During the course of nonviolence, modeled after King's nonviolent tactics in America, riots occurred, as you might expect. The African National Congress has a very similar history to communist groups that operated in America. The Communist Party and the ANC worked hand in hand with each other in South Africa. However, when the Communist Party in South Africa was banned, the members did not just quit. Mokgweetsi Mat-Habi described what happened. Quote, some African communists were joint members of the ANC and the Communist Party before the latter was banned in South Africa. Naturally, when the party was outlawed, these people became exclusive members of the ANC unless otherwise affected, end quote. Now I want to interject something here. Yesterday, in my own blog talk account, I pieced together some audio clips, mainly a Jeff Prince interview of Jan Lamprecht in South Africa. And if you don't know who he is, then you need to learn. And so I also at the end added a David Duke audio clip rather, and if it worked out right, I didn't check it. 2 clips from Dr. Martin Luther Pierce, one on the lesson of South Africa and also on Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. And we need to actually start focusing on this a lot more because whites over there are being genocided. Approximately 68,000 white people have been killed. There's over 800,000 homeless people in South Africa, which is their home country. If you are not familiar with this cause, get your ass out of your chair or whatever it takes and start learning about it, because we need to bring this to be a focal point of this movement along with all of our other concerns. And by the way, what the fuck can anybody say about it? Okay, back to this essay. It should come as no surprise that when the ANC and South African Communist Party were allowed, large rallies were held. People were carrying the sickle and hammer flag. One person held a sign that said, "Welcome ANC/Communist Party." Mandela must rule our country now, today. It should come as no surprise that Mandela has called Fidel Castro and Muammar Gaddafi each a comrade in arms. Now, at that time, Gaddafi was, considered a bad guy, blah, blah, blah. And of course, later that changed a little bit. It was softened, and then he became a bad guy in the end again. So anyway, there you have it. Let me start that sentence over again. It should come as no surprise that Mandela has called Fidel Castro and Muammar Gaddafi each a comrade in arms, since they support our struggle to the hilt. Nor should it come as a surprise that one of the ANC's former leaders, a very popular black named Chris Hani, was head of the Communist Party there. Nelson Okay, this is Mandela's middle name. What the fuck? Nelson Mandela, okay, and it got in parentheses here, whose middle name means someone who brings trouble upon self. How fitting, close quotes. Especially considering he approved bombings of the people under him of white children in school buses. Okay, I'll start that again. Nelson Mandela was the leader of the Umkhonto we Sizwe, a group that engaged in terrorist attacks against whites in the South African government. The head of the African National Congress Youth League has asked his followers to kill former South African President de Klerk. Michael Johns of the Heritage Foundation, now I've heard that ain't so great of a foundation either, by the way, described Nelson Mandela and the ANC as, quote, hitting civilian targets and refusing to renounce the use of violence against civilians for political purposes makes the ANC a terrorist group, and Mandela has not distanced himself from that policy even when asked specifically to do so, close quote. So it should come as no surprise that, like Martin Luther King Jr. and Bishop Desmond Tutu, Mandela received the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Peace Prize is a tribute to all South Africans, and said Mandela. You have to wonder how the Nobel Peace Prize Committee interprets the word peace. And, of course, we all know who just received it not too long ago. Many blacks in South Africa preferred to have self-determination rather than Mandela's government. Mang Opie, who was the leader of a black homeland, begged whites to help him stop a revolution by the African National Congress and Communist Party. About 5,000 whites came to assist him in that goal, but Mang Opie had already been captured. Some whites were seen by the black police. The whites got out of their car and laid on the ground, hoping to avoid trouble. As the whites were on the ground, holding their hands up in the air, they were mercilessly shot in cold blood by a black police officer. This is the peace and justice that the African National Congress and the Communist Party give. Similar to King, Mandela seems to be quite proficient with double talk. For instance, around the time he gained power, he said that his Freedom Charter is, by no means, a blueprint for a socialist state. However, he also stated that his goal is for redistribution, but not nationalization, of land. It provides for nationalization of mines, banks, and monopoly industry. In short, plans were to take away lands from whites, redistribute the land to his fellow blacks, and assume power over all businesses, the very essence of black socialism, which he says that his plan is not. However, he is quick to point out his foremost goal. The ideological creed of the ANC is, and always has been, the creed of African nationalism. As the embittered white communists who were so foolhardily to follow Mandela's lead are now quickly learning he has no intentions of allowing them to keep anything they currently own. And as unfortunate as it is, that has even included some of their lives, though Mandela claimed that his policies will not drive the white man into the sea. However, we currently see that this is not the case, as his policies are causing exactly that. It will be interesting to see what happens. South Africa has a very similar history to that of the U.S., except for one difference. Whites are the minority rather than the majority. And if you listen to those clips I was talking about earlier that I played yesterday, you'll get a very good, concise, straightforward history of South Africa. It appears that Mandela's views may not differ too much from those of the Nation of Islam. That should not be too surprising, since the Nation of Islam, whose newspaper is called The Final Call, has a circulation of approximately 1 million, and they recently opened the Nation of Islam information centers in different parts of Africa. In a speech that one of Farrakhan's former aides gave, he said that black South Africans should kill white people. The aide, Khalid Abdul Muhammad, who has since passed away due to natural causes, said that before a crowd at Keene College in Union, New Jersey. He wanted black South Africans to kill everything white. We have achieved the seemingly impossible, said Joe Slovo, who was the brains behind the anarchy, who helped Mandela achieve his goal, and who just happened to be the chairman of the South African Communist Party. President Clinton, knowing that his fellow revolutionaries needed help, decided to double the amount of money given to South Africa. He felt that $160 million of U.S. taxpayers' money ought to be used to help Mandela and his comrades. Money that white people paid in taxes will go to help the murder of white people in South Africa. Later, the government finally decided to give them $600 million of Americans' hard-earned taxes. The U.S. Democratic Party had even sent some of Clinton's lackeys, Stanley Greenberg and Frank Creer, to assist Mandela's African National Congress. The after effects of King continue to have an adverse effect on America and in other lands around the globe. Many misguided people do not fully understand the ramifications of following King's beliefs. They continue to believe the foolhardy notion that King was an ethical man of nonviolence. And of course, there are some still subversives who know how King's actual tactics worked and have duplicated them. Due to politically correct historical revisionists, King has been made into a figurehead. In some people's words, a prophet, a person who is much different than the Martin Luther Jr. However, when you take a look at the real King, after sifting through the platitudinous pro-King propaganda, you begin to understand how this nation has been led astray from the concepts of what made it great. I am only one and can only do so much myself, but with your help, my standing together against the lies and falsehoods that have separated this nation from its course, we can make a difference together. It will not be easy. I make no imaginary promises of something that can be accomplished on a weekend in between television shows. It will take a year or even several years, but it's something that should be done, that needs to be done now, and that will be done. And when this day is done, the King holiday and all the lies that have been built around it will be rescinded. Let the veil of lies be lifted from the people. That ends this essay. There are several hundred footnotes to this. All of it is documented. It even includes the speech by Senator Jesse Helms that I posted earlier in the chat room for the website called vdare.com. If you send me an email requesting this, or if you are already on my list already, I will be glad to send this particular PDF document out to any and all who request it. I will wait several days to a week probably to collect all the names that come in and add them to one list and try to send it all out at once. We've got to get this information spread, and this is one good way of doing it. This particular PDF file, including all the footnotes and the actual speech by Senator Jesse Helms, is 66 pages. And I covered this in 3 shows except for all the footnotes in that speech. And, the front pages have got there's a cover sheet for it. So anyway, we're going to take one more break here, and then I'll come back with a little bit more, and then we'll wrap up this show. Here is some Creedence Clearwater Revival, Pagan Baby. Okay, I'm back. Again, I want to reiterate this one thing that I mentioned earlier in this broadcast and on the first one. Most of King's FBI file is sealed until 2027. There are 16,659 pages. Only 201 of these pages are available to the public from the FBI for viewing and in a PDF format, and they are all mostly on his assassination. Again, what does that tell you? Okay, now, I heard some interesting news a little earlier today that someone was going to try to expose all of us here at Renegade. Well, good luck on that, and I look forward to hearing it. Because I'm just going to continue to expose every one of you over there who deservedly are a fraud, deserve to hear anything I have to say negative about you. Now, if you're not one of those people over there that fall into that category, it doesn't apply to you. If the shoe wears it, if the shoe fits, wear it. So anyway, that's all I'm really going to say on that. I'll wait to hear what they have to say. However, I will say this. I've been doing this longer than most anyone out there. You just may not have heard of me. There are those who do know. And I've been doing this before a bunch of you were even sperm in your daddy's testicles. All right. Some of this goes back to the early 70s when I was in junior high school. So, good luck with that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out because I really just don't want to rant anymore. I think I've said enough for the time being. So again, what happens if we don't prevail over these tyrants? The fact that they want our guns is all the more reason to have them. Anti-gun is anti-white. Anti-Semitism is a disease. You catch it from Jews. Free men aren't equal, and equal men aren't free. Odin demands that you grow the fuck up. Distinct peoples have a right to remain distinct. Multiracialism is not self-government. Forced association isn't freedom. 1488. So until next time, hail Satan.